Hey everyone, welcome back to the Unashamed podcast. This week we have something special, a little different. If you usually watch the podcast from the YouTube, you'll notice that we don't have the video on anymore. We are making some changes to the podcast, but we'll give you a bit more of information on that on a later episode. What makes today so special is, well, Zach's not here, but we have our very first special guest, and she is all the way from the United States, Emma Jones. She'll be talking to us today on a topic that is a little bit more geared to females. It's generally something that we struggle with as women, and that is comparison. Emma woke up at 6 a.m. today to be on this podcast. So we're just so thankful to have her share her wisdom with us and just the things that she's learned on comparison as well. So Emma, welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm stoked to be here. Coffee is getting me through this morning, so I'm here. I'm excited. I'm awake. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to being here and being able to share a little bit of my experience with comparison, and it's gonna be great.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. We've been planning on having Emma on the podcast for a while now, and it's finally happening, right?
Yes, I'm so excited. Like, this has been in the works for a hot minute.
It has been, and we're lucky to have you today. Emma, if there are any things that you could share with us just to give our audience a bit of a background on who you are, what you're doing, just some things that you're passionate about, your favorite color, anything like that, just give us a little bit.
Heck yeah. So, what's up, guys? My name is Emma. So, I am in second year of, y'all call it university, right? Right. Okay, cool.
College, that's fine.
Second year of college, university. I'm studying biblical studies and theology, and so I'm really big into the ins and outs of the Bible, and so I'm very passionate about all that fun stuff. I was previously studying vocal performance at a small private Christian school and learning how to sing classically and things like that, and that's something I'm still really passionate about, and so love music, love musicals, all that fun stuff. I am addicted to coffee. Like heavily. So
yeah, she has a podcast called Caffeinated Christians.
Yes, so plug. Y'all come check it out after you finish listening to this one. Yeah, I love that. I love the color yellow. I love what else do I love? I love people. I love flowers. They're super fun.
And Jesus.
And I love Jesus. I love the 3 C's. Christ, coffee, and Chick-fil-A, which is a great place here in the States. Yeah, that's basically me in a nutshell.
Awesome. So right off the bat, jumping into this whole comparison, I think comparison is one of those things that most of us struggle with, but I think we kind of shrug it off as insignificant. Like, you know how we would compare sins, such as like some sins are little sins or some sins are big sins. Like, it's okay to lie, but like murdering is not okay. And I think because we don't see the consequences or the damage that those smaller things can do. And for comparison, it goes as far as causing division sometimes, disillusions, and even damage when I think we don't take it as something that's serious, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that.
So, Emma, I know that I struggle with comparison pretty much daily. You know, it's something that I personally struggle with, and I talk about it a lot, sometimes as if I've overcome it, but I think in my personal life, I still see it scattered everywhere. And I know with you that you, before your ministry on Instagram, you actually started on TikTok, right?
Yes, I did. Oh my.
Yes. So Emma started on TikTok, and she, instead of doing what the world is doing, because you know the world has its own agendas and just its own things, Emma has used her platform to honor God with, and I'm sure just because you were honoring God on your platform, that didn't really mean that you never dealt with things such as comparison.
100%.
And just seeing what other people are doing and measuring yourself up against that. So as an influencer or as a voice on social media, how would you say that you see comparison play out in your life, whether that's in general or just when it comes to looking at even other influencers and what they're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that for me, with like when I was on TikTok and when I'm on Instagram, it's a very much number game. It's when I feel like I really struggle with comparison. One of the big things is like, oh, well, this Christian influencer has way more followers than me, then she must be, I don't like, even like to the point of like, she must be more gifted than I am, or more anointed, or the Lord must have more blessing for her than me. And that's mainly what I've been struggling with recently. And I really have to catch myself and be like, whoa, like, what am I doing this for? Am I doing this to glorify myself with followers, or am I doing this to glorify God? And then also, I think for me, comparison plays out with more of like a looks kind of thing. And so I'll go on Instagram, and lots of people from high school and things like that will post like a little more scandalous photos and things like that, and show off their body and things like that. And I start to question my own, and I'm like, okay, well, am I not beautiful? This is what beautiful is. I don't have, like, I'm not stick skinny. I don't have like abs, like all these kind of things. And so I really struggle with body image. I think with social media, because the world is kind of saying, put everything out there, put it all up there and things like that. And so I really struggle with comparison within like followers, and also just looks in general with other females, which is really really hard.
I think the cool thing, it's funny when you hear someone, because with me, like I think I've told you this before, like I absolutely adore Emma, and I think that you're not only one of the most beautiful people that I've ever met over the phone, but you're also just so talented and wise, and God has clearly given you blessings, whether that's in wisdom, whether that's in being able to encourage people with your posts on Instagram, on TikTok, wherever it may be. But it's interesting to see that even though we recognize that about other people, we don't always realize that even the people that we may envy or that we may admire struggle with their own sets of problems, or with their own struggles with comparison. Because to me, like, I would look at you and I would see all those good things, but to you, it's so easy to see the other side of that. And I think that just kind of shows that it's a universal struggle.
Yeah, 100%. It's so interesting. I mean, like, even like the most flawless people in our eyes, like, maybe crippled with comparison. So I think it's just super interesting how this is kind of affecting all of us, but we don't always see it.
Right. And I think when it comes to comparison, I think one of like the reasons that comparison can become an issue in our lives, especially as Christians, is because it really compels us to turn inward, to focus on ourselves and what we lack, or the things that might have caused us to be discontent. For example, like seeing somebody who's in a relationship when we're not in a relationship, or seeing the opportunities that other people are getting that we might not be getting. Yeah. And I think for us as Christian women especially, that's why with comparison, it's something that we can't really shrug off, because that comparison often leads us to have an inability to be thankful for the things that we do have, and for the gifts that God is blessing us with, or the work that He is doing in us, because He is always working. It's just, it doesn't always look the same as the next person's life might look like.
Absolutely. And I love the way you phrased inward. One of my favorite teachers here in the States kind of talks about our posture with God and how important that is. And a lot of times we have this in and down kind of posture where we're really focused on ourselves and kind of what we're doing and what we're not doing and what we don't have and what we want. Like, it's very much I'm looking in at myself. And she says that, like, true harmony with God looks like when we are looking up and out, and we're looking up at Him and out at Him and what He is doing, and our focus is turning back to Him. And so I love that you phrased it like that comparison is an inward posture, because that's like a very like visual way that I get to picture like where I'm at in seasons and things like that, and how important it is to be up and out and looking at God and looking at what He is doing and putting the focus on Him, because that's what we need to be doing,
That's so beautiful. I think, like, with what you said with the up and out, like, I don't know if the out is supposed to like illustrate actually being able to look at the people around us instead of at ourselves. Because I think with looking inward, it really is so hard to look at the needs of others when we're so focused on self,
Absolutely.
Awesome. So I think with comparison has different places that it stems from. And I think we all have experiences, different experiences when it comes to comparison. Personally, what would you say is the root of comparison, whether that's in your life or just what you've seen around yourself with friends or people that you've talked with?
Yeah,
what makes us compare ourselves?
Absolutely. I think a lot of it is like a strained relationship with God. I think that a lot of it is just not trusting in him. The places in my life where I have kind of let comparison like cripple me is like allowing myself to become like really depressed and anxious and things like that. I am in a place where I'm not trusting God, and I'm in a very strained relationship with him. So I feel like that is a lot of it, because you have to trust what he says when he says that you are beautiful, and you have to trust what he says when he's saying you are anointed, or have I given you these gifts, or you are special to me, or all these kind of things. You have to trust that that's true. It doesn't come easy, because everything in this world right now is fighting against the truth of what God has said. And so you have to trust in him rather than trusting all these voices around you. And so I think that's a lot of it. I also think that kind of like what I was talking about earlier with the in and down and up and out. It's like we're very much focused on ourselves, and we're focused on the self and what we want and what we aren't getting and what we feel, rather than what God is and who God is and how wonderful he is and what he has done and will do for us. And so I think that is
so good.
Yeah, I think that's like when I've been in those crippling moments, it's like, there's like comparison that like sneaks in and things like that every single day. But there's also those moments where it's like comparison is crippling you and you are not able to really move and things like that. And I think that in those moments where I've been crippled, as I look back on my life now, I was definitely in a strained relationship with my father, and I know that I bet he was just like, Emma, darling, like I've said all these things about you, I've done all these things for you, like. So I think that that's a huge root of comparison. That makes all sense.
That's awesome. That's so beautiful. I think a lot of our issues really can stem back to our relationship with God, whether that's with comparison, discontentment, joylessness. I think our relationship with God, the way that looks, influences every area of our lives. I think the saying that people say, how we're comparing our behind the scenes with someone else's highlight reel.
Ooh, that's good. Wow.
I feel like as much as that saying, sometimes I think we think it's like a cliche saying, but it's so true that the thing is that we take the entirety of our lives, like the mess and all of those, the good and the bad, and what we try to do is like we take one picture out of someone else's life, and we kind of get bummed when we think that that's a fair comparison. Because when you look at social media, really, you're always comparing from a distance, right? You don't really see what goes on behind the scene. And I think for me, especially, like my root of comparison has often come from taking my whole life and then looking at one picture that someone is showing me, and saying, well, this sucks,
Yeah, 100%.
I think one of the things that we need to realize when it comes to social media, especially, I'm sure this is something you've experienced, is that the things that we see on social media is only what people allow us to see. It's what they choose for us to see.
100%. I think that especially in the Christian, I guess, like influencer industry, or like those Instagrammers that just promote for Jesus and things like that, something that I've struggled with in the past, and I'm not struggling with it anymore. I've kind of gotten over it. But basically is a lot of like people presenting their relationship with God as very like fluffy and very simple. And I would sit there and be like, wow, their relationship with God is so easy, and I'm here struggling with doubt, and I'm here struggling with hearing him, and I'm here struggling with blah, blah, blah. And I have to realize that that's not what it's about. Kind of like what you said, Melissa. I love the way you phrased, like, people, like, that picture that you see from that Instagram account that you really compare yourself to, that's what they're allowing you to see. And some people are more vulnerable than others in social media, and I love vulnerability, and that's awesome. But it's all a highlight reel. And exactly what you said, Melissa, is just so good. And that, like, resonates so much with me, especially as someone who spends a lot of time on social media and that's basically what I'm doing. I'm putting stuff about Jesus out there, and I get so caught up in the behind the scenes of my life with the front scenes of somebody else's.
Right, exactly.
And so I think that's beautiful and so true, and I think that's, like, the dangers of social media, and where we have to start putting up boundaries and barriers, especially when trying to combat this whole comparison thing.
So true. Yeah, I think one of the things that I especially appreciate about your presence on social media, and just even the last couple of TikToks that you did, was that you came to the point where you were like, you know what, I don't want to pretend, excuse me, like I'm not struggling, because I am struggling, you know? And you're not really, how do you really help the people who look to you when they think that you don't struggle with the things that they struggle with? I think that's really when you connect with people, is when you can say, I get that, because I struggle with that as well. And I really appreciate and admire that you do that with your platform.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. It's hard. It's scary sometimes. You're like, oh, I'm really putting myself out there. But I appreciate you. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks so much. So then, I know with comparison, comparison's never a loner. It always brings its troops along. And I think, of course, that can vary from person to person in our experiences. But what would you say are some other thoughts or emotions or even sins that can come out of comparison?
Yeah. From my own personal experience, when I've been heavily comparing myself, and it kind of changes, I think, as I grow older. I'm like, I find a new thing to compare myself to, which is sick, it's so sad. I think that I become really anxious and depressed, and so anxiety looks like in the way of, like, trying to micromanage everything about me to look like the one person or the multiple people I'm comparing myself to, or what I believe is ideal. And so I become really anxious and very self-conscious. A lot of times for me, comparison is looks, and so I'll be really or self-conscious and, like, what am I wearing? How am I presenting myself? Like, let me go to the gym a bunch of times today, and, like, all this kind of stuff. So I'm getting very anxious because I'm trying to micromanage my life to look as much like person A or B. And then I allow myself to really just get depressed as well, and to kind of allow like, that I'm not good enough to become the root of my foundation and what I walk on and what I allow to kind of run through my head each day. And so I become really depressed and numb, and I kind of get to the point where I'm like, well, why should I even try? If I'm never going to reach this goal or this standard that I believe is to be good, then why should I even try? And so those are two, like, major, I guess things that happen to my life when I let comparison become the foundation of everything. And my relationship with the Lord just kind of dies. Like, not that I stop believing in him or whatever, not that he stops pursuing me. I just totally stop pursuing him because I'm like, well, why even bother? And so for sinning, I think for me, I'm so much more irritated when I'm in those places where I'm very quick to lash out and get angry at other people and become just very hostile. I think that can happen with a lot. When we feel anxious and depressed and things like that, we're very quick to get upset and angry. And I think that whole, like, mindset is so negative and so unhealthy. As someone who loves relationships and loves people, when I become irritated and annoyed and begin straining those relationships, it not only creates discord within me, but also discord in all of my friendships and all of my family relationships, and that's heartbreaking. And so that's from my experience, but I think that it can be a mixture of things. I feel like that people can go to, like, really unhealthy coping mechanisms after, like, they allow comparison to become the root of their life. They can become really angry, really numb, and I think it's a different response for everyone. But I think the similarity between all the things is just it creates discord and dysfunction in yourself and who you are and everyone around you.
It's so true.
It's so sad, so heartbreaking.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Emma.
Mm-hmm.
I think, like what you were saying, when it comes to comparison, it's almost like you said, you set up this type of goal, you know, this person or this type of life or this kind of a relationship is this goal that we set forth for ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's kind of sad, because when we look at it, God has made us all so vastly different, and He's given us, I mean, we don't look the same. We don't, just us. We don't look the same. We don't have the same accents. We don't have the same gifts.
Yeah.
And it's actually, it's a beautiful thing. He's made us different for a reason. And the sad thing is, especially with the world, I think that we live in, that has its own standard of what beauty is or what success is. We try to mold all of us into the same mold, and it never works. It never satisfies, because, you know, if you're skinny this year, you're in fashion, and this year you're the goals, and next year thick girls are the goals, you know, and then what do you do? It just doesn't work.
It's like, it's when the point where we become like, we allow the world to dictate us rather than just running after our creator, and we listen to the voices of the world, which has and I think I've written like a blog post about it, or like an Instagram, I don't know, especially about body image, because that's such a huge, like, just again, like a huge struggle in my life. But it's like we let this world that does not care about us whatsoever dictate who we are, instead of listening to a creator who cares so much about us. I mean, entire book written about how he has saved us. And so I think it's just so interesting and heartbreaking. Again, it's just like, it makes me so sad to see the people I love struggling with comparison. And so I think that's exactly what you said.
Honestly, that the part when you said how we allow like a world that doesn't even care about us dictate how we live, or, you know, our standards, and yet ignore a God who literally wrote the Bible and cares for us each day and pursues us. Like, I got goosebumps when you say that, because I've never really seen it in that way, and I hope that everyone listening will be affected by that, because I think thinking of it that way really makes you see that it's not worth investing time into that at all.
100%.
That's so good.
And it's a lot harder. Like, there are lots of voices in this world that are trying to control you, and there's the one quiet, still voice of Jesus that's trying to lead you, which I think is also a huge difference. So you have to really fight, and it's a hard battle, but it's possible to win.
For sure. So with your personal, of course, like, now that we've kind of established how in your own personal life you experience comparison in different ways, and how that affects your life, your mind, your emotions, even your relationships with other people, how do you think that your relationship with God, or even your relationship with God's word, how does that influence your personal struggle? How does that help you struggling with comparison?
I think that as my relationship with the Lord grows, I feel like it's a lot harder to give into the voices of the world and comparison. I feel like because, like, as I'm growing in my walk with the Lord, it's becoming a lot stronger, which is super fun, super great. But I think that because I spend time in the Word and I spend time with the Lord, I'm familiar with His voice, and I'm familiar with what the Word says about me. I mean, Psalm 139 is a really great chapter to read on what God thinks of you, and so beautiful, so great. And so I think that having that foundation and starting my morning each day with the Lord and with His Word, I'm putting on my armor. Ephesians 6 talks about putting on the armor of God and how important that is to combat against the devil's schemes. And my mom has this saying, it's in my whole, like, ministry I hope to continue to pursue. It's called Put Your Jesus On, PYJO. It's something my mom has said for years. Like, when I was a baby, she started saying that kind of stuff. And I think that in order for us to, again, combat against the devil's schemes, one of which being comparison, we have to put our armor on each day. And so I feel like that because I have got into a routine of doing that, and let me tell you, it doesn't always happen every single morning, and the days that it doesn't, I'm a grumpy mess. But
you feel it.
Yeah. Holly's over here, like, nodding her head. Yeah.
She feels it.
Yeah. But you have to put on the armor, and so I feel like whenever I decide to do that on the days that are good, I'm able to combat against the devil's schemes a lot more efficiently. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that you kind of use like the battle illustration with Ephesians 6, because I think when we have God's word hidden in our hearts beforehand, like it is preparing us for that battle. Because I think when it comes to thoughts of comparison, like they don't do scheduled visits, you know. They show up unannounced.
Yeah.
And sometimes they show up frequently, you know. You don't think yourself into comparison. Sometimes you just open an app and right there is the opportunity for yourself to compare yourself to someone else.
Absolutely.
But like with what you said, if you wake up in the morning and you establish that relationship with God and you spend time in His Word, it's so much easier excuse me, to show up when comparison comes, because you're already prepared for it. Because I think a lot of the times we think, no, I can handle this, so I'm going to open my Instagram, and as soon as something hits, I'm going to open my Bible. But that doesn't happen at all. Instead, you find yourself scrolling for hours and hours and hours, and it just gets worse and worse, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when dealing with comparison, boundaries are so important. I mean, recently I had to take a weekend off of social media because of just how crippled I felt and how tired I felt and how kind of worn. And it's really nice to, you know, take a break. Because, I mean, social media, I feel like is a main root and a main cause of comparison. Yeah. It's because it's easiest to access, especially now during COVID and everything. And so I feel like boundaries are incredibly important when dealing with that. And don't be afraid to take them. They're so good.
Yeah. Take your breaks and set your boundaries. You can write that somewhere.
100%. Put it above your bed. I don't know.
So then I think just to kind of wrap this up, for everyone who's listening, I'm sure that they learned a lot, that they got a lot out of this. I hope that they have. And just kind of, even if you just relate with what Emma said today, because I know a lot of us have the secret struggle of comparison, and we see how that leads to things like envy, like Emma said, divisions. It does influence and affect our relationships as well. How would you say, or what would you say would be kind of like the remedy for comparison? How can we combat comparison in our daily lives, whether that's practical things that we can do or just things that we can start practicing in our hearts or in our minds, affirmations, anything like that?
Absolutely. I think that for starters, just pursuing the Lord and running after Him, because if the goal is to hear His voice and what He says about you and how much He loves you, you're not going to be able to recognize it if you don't spend time with Him. And so I feel like first, like, really running after Him and starting off your mornings and putting on the armor of the Lord, and that's all in Ephesians 6. And so reading over that and meditating on that and meditating on the law of the Lord, so that you can become familiar with His voice and know when it's Him talking to you, and then being able to understand, oh, this is not God speaking to me right now. And so I think that, and then I think more so, I think I've been having to say this to Holly, and Holly's been having to say this to me a lot recently, is taking every thought captive. And so whenever you hear that voice, or you have that thought of like, oh, I'm not as pretty as her, or I'm not as skinny as her, or I'm not as thick as her, whatever it is that you're comparing yourself to, taking that thought and being like, okay, does this match up with what the Bible says about me? Does this match up with what my Father in heaven says about me? I don't think so. And being able to like combat that specific thought with Scripture and be like, okay, this is not valid, this is a lie, this is not true. And so it takes a lot more effort, and it's really hard to do that, especially when we're like, you know, going through our day, doing our things, whatever it is that we're like doing that day. Just taking every single thought captive and presenting it to the Lord and being like, Lord, help me with this. And I think also crying out to God and being like, God, I cannot do this on my own. I'm not able to combat against comparison without you.
Yeah.
And so I
that's
think
so important.
that as well. And then I guess more like physical rather than emotional things or like logical things to do is take breaks. If social media is a huge place of comparison for you, get off of it for a little bit of time.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that. Like nothing at all. And so I think that for me, like social media is where it's at. Like all social media platforms, I have to get off of it. Because I've talked a lot about my struggle with body image. I had to walk away from the gym for a month. Granted, a lot of that being I was really busy and things like that, but I also was so strained in, okay, I need to make sure I'm burning these many calories and I need to whatever. And so if you need to take a break from working out because you're obsessive over it, take a break from that. Whatever is allowing comparison to feed you and you're wherever, like whatever I guess triggers that, step away for a little bit, even if it's just for a day or a few days or a week, whatever it is. I think that putting up boundaries and knowing where your triggers are and where comparison is able to feed in you, and allowing the Lord to feed in you. And so that's, I think, more of like a logical rather than emotional way to handle comparison and things like that. But find your triggers, find your hard spots, and where you really struggle. And I think that presenting that to the Lord and being like, God, like I'm struggling with this, or I don't feel filled in this area, and just being honest with Him, I think is very important. And that's what I have to do. And I feel like that's very helpful to me whenever I do all that fun stuff.
You see the difference when you do that. So that was so good, Emma. Thank you for sharing with us just how you try to combat comparison in your life each day. Like Emma said, the Word of God is so important, and we don't just say that because it's the Christian thing to say, but we honestly say that because it is what works, you know. God has made our hearts, He's made our thoughts, and there's really no one who can remedy our hearts the way that He can. And His word is powerful to do that. I think just a couple more practical ways that I would add before we close this is, I think serving others probably plays such a big role in comparison, because when you serve others and you look to others' needs, it's much harder to be self-focused, you know, and comparison can come from a very self-focused place. And I know for me personally, I've had to see how I can look to other people's needs more often than my own to combat comparison, and that's not always easy. I think just another thing is probably thankfulness, which is also where contentment comes, because really comparison comes out of being discontent in some way or another, right? So for sure, practicing contentment in your relationship with the Lord, I think that might be a way to help. And I think lastly, just realize that we all have different strengths, we all have different weaknesses, we're not all the same, and that's okay, because God has made us that way. It's so much easier for you to choose compliments over comparison, and I think once we are able to see the good and the beauty and the strengths in other people, God will probably also allow us to be able to see those in ourselves. And we won't need to have that urge to compare ourselves with other people around us.
100%, totally agree with you.
So that is it for comparison today, Emma. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having
being
me.
on the
I
podcast.
appreciate it.
We honestly, we're so thankful. If you want to, you can go and follow Emma if you want to hear some more. She has a website, a blog called Put Your Jesus On.
Yes.
That you can go and subscribe to. She also has an Instagram as well as a podcast called Caffeinated Christians.
Caffeinated Christians, that's what's up. We drink coffee. Holly's on it. She's great. So
it's awesome. Their podcast is amazing. What we'll do is I will link Emma's details either in a story or in one of our Instagram posts. You can go follow her and get in contact with her if you have any more questions on this topic.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Emma.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. That's it for this podcast. If you guys enjoyed this, please send us messages. We'd love to interact with you if you have any questions. And we will see you in the next podcast.
Adios.
Bye.